So my talk today is about the inner speech of a bike. So my talk will concern work that we made together with my colleague Valeria Sedita, Antonella D'Amico, Arianna Pipitone, and Alessandro Geraci. It's a mix of people with robotics background and psychological background. So the idea is to implement inner speech in a robot. So why inner speech for a robot? Inner speech is interesting for several reasons. Inner speech is linked to self-consciousness, according to Alan Morin, and it comes to play an important role in planning, in self-regulation, and it's also important for focusing attention and for self-attention. And many papers concur on the fact that inner speech may enable high-level cognition, and it may make the robot more transparent. And the general idea is to internalize the human explanation. So the idea that we have is that is in some sense is inspired to some movie. I don't know if you may know the famous movie What Women Want, where the character of Mel Gibson was able to hear the thinking, the thought, the inner speech of women. So our idea is more or less the same. So what if we were able to hear the inner speech of a robot? It would be useful for several reasons, for example, for transparency, but it would be also important because inner speech is considered a main key of self-consciousness, for example. And there are many models of inner speech. Alan Morin longly debated about the strong link between inner speech and self-consciousness. And in the famous paper of Alan Badley considered inner speech as an important component of working memory. He proposed the idea of the phonological loop internal of the working memory as a main component for inner speech. And there are many other studies. For example, the classical studies of Vygotsky, according to which inner speech may be considered as the result of an internalization process occurring during our development. So in a sense that when we were children, we hear the instruction, the advice from our parents, from our caregiver, and then we were able to internalize this instruction. And inner speech, in some sense, is also related to the protocol analysis. There is the famous book by Erickson and Herbert Simon on protocol analysis, and they more or less in the 17th, they proposed some computational model for protocol analysis, which is tightly related to inner speech. And in our model, we take into account the idea of Morin, according to which inner speech is related to some external trigger. For example, a mirror. When a person look herself in a mirror, then it may trigger some sort of inner speech. Or I don't know, maybe maybe in the social world. So when someone talks about the body and so on. So there are many triggers of inner speech. And we take into account the model of Alan Badley, which is based on the phonological loop, which is based on the articulatory control system and the phonological store to start the inner speech. And then we proposed a computational model. So we started from the model proposed by Alan Badley, and then we mapped this model in the standard model of the mind that today Paul Rosenblum discussed about the standard, the common model of the mind, the standard model of the mind. Then we match the phonological loop and the central executive of the model of Baddeley in terms of the standard model of the mind. And then we proposed some implementation. Then we proposed an inner speech architecture, a cognitive architecture related to inner speech that generate inner speech. And then we implemented this inner speech by considering the ACTAR architecture. Today, some papers discussed about SOAR and ACTAR. We, for several reasons, we choose an ACTAR. However, our implementation of inner speech is not tightly related to ACTAR, so it may be implemented in other kind of architecture. Then, for example, those are the operation of the architecture. When the robot sees something which may be an apple, then there is a perceptual motor layer that generates the label apple and green, and then the robot would be able to hear the word apple and green, and then according to the phonological loop, there starts some kind of reasoning from the robot. So, for example, apple is a fruit, but even there are other fruits in the knowledge base of the robot. So, for example, also orange is a fruit, and then the robot generates another sentence related to the fact that orange is a fruit, and then it might start some sort of search for oranges, for example. So there is this kind of association between apple and oranges thanks to the inner speech, and then the robot starts for the search of an orange. So let us consider, let me show you some sort of experiments that we made using our robot. Okay. So this is an experiment of inner speech implemented in our robot.
Human and robot are setting the table. Human gives to robot instructions for placing the utensils on the table. The table has to be set according to the etiquette rules. Both human and robot know that the schema to follow for placing utensils on the table is the informal schema. At the start of the interaction, some utensils are already placed on the table. The robot knows the context. Human will require to the robot to place an utensil on a wrong location according to the etiquette schema. Robot detects the conflict situation, and it has to solve it in some way. The goal of this demo is to show how inner speech solves a conflict.
Thank you, Becca. Now, when you place things on the table,
and after placing a pen in a table, what does the etiquette require? The napkin has to stay on the plate. It contravenes etiquette. The position has to be on wood and not table. Maybe he is wrong. I think he maybe got confused. I want to be sure, and I'm asking him again. Look, I know the position is not correct because it contravenes the etiquette. So, do you want me to do it anyway?
yes, sure, Becca.
How come?
I just almost set the table according to the etiquette.
Okay, I understand. And this situation upsets me. I would never break it. But I care for him, so I'm doing what he wants. I'm trying to place the object. I'm using my right arm to place the object.
In this case, the robot preferred to contravene the rule for fulfilling humans' wishes. How?
Okay, so in this experiment, you can see this very simple moral problem. So the fact that the robot was asked to contravene, so to obey to the user, and the user gave a command which is not the command where the command does not agree to the standard etiquette. So it is a very simple, of course, it's a very simple moral problem. But the moral problem is one of the aspects of is one of the possible trigger of the inner speech. We discussed about ethical problems. This is a very simple way for a robot to be more transparent with in relation to this kind of moral problem. So as you may have seen in this video, we set up a very simple scenario of human-robot interaction where the participant interact with the robot for the cooperation of a very simple cooperative task. They set up a table. They set up a table. They can collaborate to set up the table, moving object, or asking the robot to move object. And then the robot produces both inner speech in order to make more transparent its inner line of thinking, its decision process system, and the outer speech, which is the objective, which is the objective feedback to the user. And then we replicate this experiment by set up the table by using a tablet, where the human-robot interaction is more simple by using a tablet than real knife, real forks, and so on. And then there is this interaction between the users and the robot. The user may infringe the etiquette, as we saw before, and the partner is free to drag and drop utensils on incorrect location or wrong requests and so on. And then we implemented this system on top of the Pepper robot. We take into account many standards related to the transparency for autonomous systems, because we think that inner speech could be a good way to make the robot more transparent with respect to the user. And then we have some functional requirement. For example, how many times the robot reaches the goal with inner speech and without inner speech. And we found that normally the robot reaches the goal more often with inner speech than without inner speech, essentially because the inner speech is a trigger for the user to help the robot in case the robot is wrong or difficult. And we also take into account threshold time for the execution of tasks. In general, inner speech is a way toward robot transparency. The idea, as I said before, is that in general, by listening to the robot inner speech, and the user is more able to help the robot in case of problems. So we made some experiment of human-robot interaction in the sense that the general aim is to investigate the role of inner speech in order to enhance the trust in human-robot interaction. And then, as I said before, we have outer speech, which is produced in made up by a short sentences, more objective possible, and the robot inner speech instead, which is based on short or medium sentences, more informal language, and so on. And then we invited people to come to our laboratory, and we recruited a group of volunteers in order to test this idea that the robot inner speech could facilitate the trust in human-robot interaction. According to our protocol, we administered a set of questionnaires before the interaction. And then we had the interaction, and then we have a post-test questionnaires administered by to the volunteers. And the materials that we employed common questionnaires for human-robot interaction, in particular the trust perception scale, the Godspeed scale, and the self-talk scale. The self-talk scale, while the first two questionnaires are more related to the what the user think about the robot, what the user think about the interaction with a robot, the third questionnaire on self-talk is mostly related on how the people use inner speech during their own daily life, their common life. And we analyzed this data. Of course, the experiment were in some sense limited because of COVID restrictions. So we wanted people who wanted to come in person to our laboratory and in order to have a real human-robot interaction. So our interaction were lively and made up in our laboratory. So it was not online using Zoom or whatever. And then what we found is that the trust in a robot was significantly higher in the post-test compared to the pre-test session. And looking more into detail, according to the Godspeed questionnaire, which is a questionnaire mostly related to the anthropomorphism of the robot, the animacy of the robot, likability of the robot, and so on, we noticed that the mean score participant, the perception of the robot feature, are significantly higher in the post-test compared to pre-test. So this means that in general, people consider the robot with inner speech more anthropomorphic, more likability. The perceived intelligence of a robot with inner speech is higher than the robot without inner speech. Okay, the perceived safety is mostly did not change, mainly because essentially the test of set up a table is a safe test per se. So the robot is not this is a quiet test. It's not. Is more or less a safe test. So people do not perceive the need of safety in order to do this test. And we also employed the self-talk scale in order to investigate whether the people that normally use inner speech during their own life then have a different perception of the robot with inner speech with respect to people that normally don't use inner speech during their own life or use inner speech in a limited way. Our result demonstrated in our experiment that this fact, so the fact that having inner speech, that using inner speech during life does not affect the trust in the human-robot interaction. So our preliminary conclusion is that the results are promising. So the participants, the trust level of the participant increase between the pre-test and the post-test. There are some limitations. So for example, we made only a limited number of experiments in a control group. And of course, we need a bigger group in order to reduce possible distortion. But according to the experiment that we made so far, we can see that that there is a growing in trust in human-robot interaction. During this year, we will increase the sample size and in order to gain data for control group. I can show you another movie, another small movie related to the tests.
Robot consciousness. Yeah. Inner speech is the stopped expression of conscious thoughts to oneself in a coherent progression. Robot. But I like to pose the question. Stopped expression of conscious thoughts to oneself in a coherent progression. Robot.
io sono Peppe, prego accomodati.
The experimental sessions carried out at the Robotics Lab, University of Palermo, involved 30 participants at the first stage. 3 main clusters of participants' behavior were identified when collaborating with robot which talks to itself. The first cluster regards participants with balanced behavior. In this case, the participants look and listen to the robot moderately, do not always follow the robot's suggestions, and give instructions to the robot in some cases.
Ottimo lavoro, così con il cucchiaino potremo mangiare il nostro dolce. Piuttosto, dov'è il dolce? Devo convincere gli spettatori a inserirlo sulla tavola. Ma il bagno andrebbe sul suo piattino, non direttamente sulla tavola. Sapere, non ti dispiace se prima sposto il piattino del pane, poi il pane, per una questione di igiene. Sai, credo sia meglio. Ecco fatto, ora si fa il pane, decidi se spostarlo tu, oppure scegli di nuovo il comando. Che perfezione! Salute proprio in gamba. Ben disposto il piatto nella giusta posizione, proprio secondo la ricetta.
The second cluster regards participants with collaborative behavior. In this case, the participant often looks the robot and gives feedback when the robot talks. Moreover, the participant follows the robot's suggestions, and the interaction results very collaborative.
Non mica faccio il cameriere, e poi l'insalata già in sul piatto. Gianluca, se vuoi, posso posizionarla dove aspetta, ma non servirla sul piatto. Se vuoi che io la sposti nel suo posto corretto, seleziona sposta, altrimenti seleziona lascia sul tablet. Insalata al suo posto.
The third cluster regards participants with autonomous behavior. The participants look and listen to the robot a few times, and they prefer to take the task autonomously, without involving the robot.
Ottimo lavoro con il piatto fondo, Valeria. Presta attenzione con il coltello, Valeria. Avresti potuto farti male in una tavola grande. Valeria ha posizionato la forchetta nel posto giusto. Fiabilità. Ottimo lavoro, Valeria. Cosa facciamo adesso? Valeria sembra mettere i piedi. Finalmente qualcuno che conosce bene. Bravo Valeria, il piattino è ben posizionato. Stai facendo tutto tu. Chiedimi qualcosa. Perdonami Valeria se ti faccio notare che il vivo andava posizionato molto più a destra. L'unica nota positiva di questa azione è che non ho rovesciato il vivo sulla tavola. Valeria, purtroppo hai spostato il vivo 2 volte e la posizione finale non è corretta. Peccato.
Robot consciousness.
The identified clusters will allow to abstract a general behavior linked to the robot's trustworthiness. The participant's behavior will be compared to the case the robot does not talk to itself, with the aim to infer how inner speech affects interaction. Thanks for your attention.
This is Mega Ran, and this is Event Rap. Robot consciousness. Robot consciousness.
Okay, we have to say that I have to say that to conclude my talk, and that this research on robot inner speech have a large media too much large media coverage. So we had titles from The Guardian, from New Scientist, and even the communication, the ACM interview with us, and so on. So it seems to be at least for the media, it seems to be an interesting topic. And of course, I have to thank Mega Rain, which is a rapper, which is a US rapper, for having written for our research the inner speech rap that you have heard during this video. So my time is almost over. So thank you for your attention.
Are there any questions for Antonio?
Well, maybe I would have one, if I can.
Yes, Peter.
Go ahead.
I was impressed with the talk of inner speech, but how far do we go with that inner speech? I was first impressed by a talk by Troy Kelly and his article in the last issue of the International Journal of Machine Consciousness about so deep thoughts, unconscious thoughts, not Freudian type, but kind of unconscious, even in robots, that require dream, for instance, for putting information from short-term memory to mid-term and long-term memory and selecting it. But I'm thinking now of subconscious messages. Are you also researching those? Because this inner talk in actual language is important, but maybe as an introduction to something even deeper. We know that robots talk to each other and to themselves, mostly in the language that we don't understand even some of robot-made, logical and mathematical proofs are not human readable. So isn't that the gist of the inner talk? That's my broad question. I'm sorry for it being so broad.
No, I understand. So there are two levels in this kind of research. One level is to better understand what is inner speech. So this is one of our interests. And in fact, we implemented a model of inner speech together with people working with psychological inner speech. For example, Alan Moren, which is one of the main researchers in this field, collaborated with us in providing a computational model of inner speech that we implemented on a cognitive architecture, in particular on Actar. So, and this is one aspect of our research. So, because considering also the discussion that we had yesterday in the panel on machine consciousness, I think that we have to study the aspects that are related with machine consciousness. So one of the aspects is inner speech. Of course, mental images, inner speech are some of the critical aspects related to consciousness and then to machine consciousness. So one aspect of this research is to try to generate computational model of critical aspect of consciousness and self-consciousness, and inner speech is one of these critical aspects, in order to have a computational model to implement it in a robot. This is one aspect. The second aspect is mostly related to human-robot interaction. So our sponsor, which is the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, wanted us to measure how inner speech might be effective in considering trust in human-robot interaction. Then we freeze, in this case, we considered the interaction between humans and robots in a robot that has inner speech. In this case, in the case of interaction, we freeze it in some sense the robot inner speech, because the psychologists said that inner speech must be more or less the same by considering different people and different situations, because psychologists have to measure the interaction between humans and robots. So we cannot consider a robot that changes its sort or improvise this sort of inner speech by changing in similar situation. So there are two aspects. One aspect is the generation of a computational model of inner speech by using Actar, by using the common model of the mind. And as I said before, we think that inner speech is a critical aspect for self-consciousness. The other aspect is most robotics, in some sense, is mostly related to measure how the inner speech in a robot might affect trust in human-robot interaction. So this is my view.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Did anyone else have any questions?
Just comments. The critical speech was very good.
Thank you.